So I've been working on this 3 horsepower McCormick Daring M for a while, and I've got it all painted, with the exception of these flats on the flywheel, and they're a lot easier to sand and get ready for paint when the engine's running. So I run it and I'll just hold sandpaper to the edges here. And I think I'll probably paint them black, but I went through and cleaned the fuel lines, and lo and behold, somebody put brass ones in here. I didn't even know they were so gross and cruddy that couldn't even tell, but it really does make it pop. I added a brass chain and polished up, put this together, added brass here and there just to kind of make it look a little nicer and dress it up. So it's today I actually cleaned all the fuel lines and mounted this. I think I'm going to paint this black or green. I haven't quite decided yet.
None of this was on last time. Do you want to talk about what you put on here, or what all the parts are?
Okay, yeah, so I did the, so this is the head, mounted the head, got the valves working, cleaned the valves up, went through the whole head, and I lapped the valves. They were in really good shape, so it was surprising. I thought I'd probably have to buy some, but they ended up working out well. Went through the carb mixer, whichever you want to call it, put a new butterfly down in here, 2 new needle valves, one for the gas side, one on the kerosene side. The water side I'm probably going to hook up, but I'll never use, because I'm not going to run it on kerosene. I'll just run it on gas. Compensators, it's the old one. It was good. Put a new compensator spring in it. These are the original valve springs that were on it, both of them. I've only replaced a couple of springs, one in the fuel pump and this compensator spring are the only ones that I replaced. Went to Amazon and bought 2 new brass balls for the fuel pump. Instead of, I can buy 5 of them for like $3 or $8 a piece from some of the other places, and they're just a 3/8 brass ball. I timed the exhaust valve, and then I also timed the ignition. And you don't time them together, you do them separately. So you time the exhaust valve first, or I did. And the way it works is when you roll it up here on compression, you'll watch that, probably won't pick it up, but it'll fire. That was the mag firing. So then you roll it over 180 degrees, or excuse me, 360 degrees. And it says right here, ignition, and right down here, look, Dave, back up. So it says ignition here and exhaust here, and there's a notch in the crankcase, and you line up the line on the exhaust with the line here on the crankcase. And when those 2 are lined up, you just want this rod to just barely kiss this valve. So what I did is I had to adjust this. I'm gonna have to repaint it, but I had to spin this out because that was about 3/8 of an inch or half an inch too short. So I spun that out, and then you make your final adjustments over here on this side. You just want to try to keep this rocker as close to straight as you can. You don't want it kicked over one way or the other. You want it straight. And it's just, and when you, so I just have you probably hear it. It's just barely touching it. You just want it to kiss when this is lined up down here from this line to this notch. And then when you roll it over, you can see your cam right here. When you roll it over, then it'll open this valve. Let's open that exhaust valve. And then when you get that done, you go back over here again, I got a light, and you roll it up and you come up on compression right here, and there's an ignition mark right here on this flywheel, and there's the notch right here, and you want this mag to trip when this lines up with this notch. So if we watch it, it'll go right there. See that line right there and that notch? And we just tripped the magneto, so we're lined up, so we're timed ignition wise, and we're timed exhaust. So, you know, those are the two things. You're not coming up on the cam when you're coming up, when you roll it over 360 degrees, come back over here to exhaust, and you line this little line up with that one. If you'll notice, right here, we're not on a high spot on the cam, but it doesn't matter. This is where you're supposed to time it. Right here, you just want it barely kissing right here when that's on the exhaust. And that's how you time these things. It's not a lot to it. You always do it with its run, and you time it with this lever at run. You don't want to time it with this lever up at start. You have to time it with this lever down at the run position, because if you watch what happens, at the start position, when it fires, when the magneto fires, it fires right here on the ignition line, right there. Right there. Now, if we roll it up to the start position, it retards it. So when we go back around, we'll see where it fires this time. So coming up on compression, and right here's our ignition, right here's our line. It fired right about here, so a good 4 inches past it. And that's just to keep it from kicking back and running backwards. So once you get it started, then you flip it down into run position, and it puts it back in time. So you always want to time these things when the switch is in the run position.
Can you move the switch again?
That's right here. This is start. And see what it does? It just changes this, just retards it a little bit on the magneto. So then, and then I didn't have to adjust this, but if you need to adjust your timing for the ignition, you let me think. If the ignition is firing late, then you run this in. There's 2 springs here, and that's what pulls the magneto back and forth. You end up loosening this jam nut and screwing this in to speed up your timing. So did that today. It's getting close. Also spent a lot of time cleaning out the goo on these old grease cups. And the thing is somebody put the original grease cups, they put a grease zerk in, and let me see if I should be right here. You can see where they had here's one of the caps, and it's one of those old school grease zerks that doesn't have the ball on it. And then when I was taking it apart, when I was taking this engine apart, I kept this one in here because this is how I found it. That's not it. Let's see if I can find it. It's right here. So I unscrewed this grease cap, and that's what I found in it. You see that ball bearing? It had fallen out of this grease zerk, so obviously putting a grease zerk on a grease cap is a horrible idea, because these things, the ball bearing is going to go in a horrible spot. It's going to go either on your main bearings, which this one was a main bearing, or it's going to go in here on your cam bearings, or it's going to go into here, into your rod bearing. But all 4 of these caps had a grease zerk on it. So I had an old engine, an earlier McCormick, that has a little different style cap, but I put those caps on it.
You said 3 of the ball bearings were floating around in the bearings, right?
Yeah, I found 3 ball bearings in the engine. I found one right here. I found one on this main bearing. I found one on the cam, and I found one that had been pushed in to the rod bearing. So, and this is the 4th one that's in that grease cup. So if anybody would have put any grease in it, it would have done the same thing. It would have eventually shoved that bearing into that ball bearing into this main bearing. I took this main bearing apart. The grease, that ball bearing was sitting in the crease in between the 2 shells of the main bearing there. So horrible idea. Somebody's just freaking lazy.
And that's why it wouldn't rotate very well, would
Yeah,
it?
it wouldn't rotate worth a damn. I loosened this nut on this grease, or on this main bearing cap, and it spun like crazy. I thought, what's going on? So I pulled the main bearing off, and there's that BB ball bearing in there. So whatever you do, don't be like that guy was. Don't put a grease zerk in those, because it can cause problems. So I rebuilt the crankcase breather, and they had a leather. It's got a flapper in there with a spring on the bottom that had a leather gasket, but I just made one out of petroleum resistant neoprene rubber, so it just feels like rubber. It doesn't feel like neoprene like a wetsuit. And then I also made I made gaskets for the grease cups out of this stuff, and the gasket goes, I'll show you, and it'll keep it from squirting out the side as much. If you look in there, you see the gasket in the bottom. That little black gasket, I made those for the grease cups. And then that helps keep it from squirting out down around the threads as much. There's still a couple of things I have to touch up. I need to touch up these two bolts, a couple of places here and there, but it's getting ready. It's got pretty good compression. I still need to clean up the belt pulley. I still have to adjust the governor and the throttle linkage here. It all has to be adjusted still, but it's on there. It's got pretty decent compression. I think it's going to be a pretty good engine. Also today, I broke out my gold pinstripe paint. I made a panel a couple of days ago with this paint on it, with this green, to see if I like the color with the gold on it. I'll probably put these gold pinstripes on it, probably something a little smaller, closer together, something like at the bottom maybe. And then I'll do the flywheels too. I'll put a couple of stripes on at least one stripe around the flywheel, probably one that kind of comes out to two along the spokes on the flywheel. But I just wanted to see if I like this color. I think I do. If not, then I'll put like a light gray maybe. But I think the gold will look good with all the brass that I found for this engine. So anyway, it shouldn't be too long now before it starts running. So thanks for watching.